suddenly made Warrior very, very flexible. So the Execute nerf was probably aimed to address that kind of flexibility, and so far, Warrior still looking just as dominant, just as flexible, being able to build it in a variety of different ways.
Right, so match 2, we are looking at freezemage going up against ahqShaxy's mid-range shaman, and this is a matchup that is much friendlier for the freezemage than aggro shaman versus freezemage.
It absolutely is, yeah. And there's a quote from Laughing that Frodan shared with us yesterday, I think, which is, this matchup is borderline unlosable if you're the freezemage, but it is very easy to make a mistake in as the freezemage. So in his eyes, it's an easy matchup, but not a forgiving matchup. You have to do the right things at the right time. If you don't, then things can slip away from you. But it's one of the big reasons for the resurgence of freezemage is this being the go-to shaman deck, and then that freezemage presence in the meta has dictated so many other things, like Control Warrior being a powerhouse, Zoo not being as effective, etc. So, yep, Loot Hoarder after the Doomsayer here is huge, and if you do get the early Doomsayer and it goes off, that puts your win rate through the roof as a freezemage player against shaman, because so many of their cards are built on early snowball. So if you can block that, game on.
Right, and you mentioned Resurgence Freezemage. I just want to point out, 3 Freezemages in this tournament. So this is, we haven't really seen more than like one odd Freezemage in any of the events in like the past month and a half, 2 months, and it's always been kind of a big deal where it's people bringing it in their signature Freezemage players. This is what they do. The quote goes, you're either Freezemage or you're not.
Yes.
But we see 3 of them here, and I think that's a big question mark with this whole tournament is we, in the Western scene, don't necessarily have that level of experience with these players to say, oh, are they really good Freezemage players? Do we think they can actually hack it? And to your point, make the correct plays necessary to win these very favorable matchups for them. So a lot of questions on Gogongsing's ability to play this deck.
Yeah, it certainly are, but so far he hasn't really had to pass too many tests. The Doomsayer into Loot Hoarder opening pretty much plays itself against Shaman, and he's managed to get himself into a comfortable position because of it. We'll see if he's put to the test later on, if Shaxy can race his way back into this, but not really a proactive-looking hand right now, which means Gogongsing as the freezemage player is going to have so much time to set himself up.
Right, and we see just the Blood Mage Thalnos come out, and the major difference, Shaman is still a powerhouse class.
Yep.
That's what it is. We saw 8 players bringing it, and we're probably going to see 8 players next week bringing it. It's just the class that if you leave it alone, it just wins. But, the turns are a lot more docile now, I would want to say, than they were in aggro Shaman. Like, we just saw a Thalnos come out.
Yep.
That's just, sometimes you just play a Thalnos, sometimes you play the Spirit Claws, but it's missing a lot of the high-octane early turns that aggro Shaman had that honestly gave freezemage fits.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Flame Wreath Faceless and the Doomhammer, those 2 cards between them were just an absolute nightmare for freezemage. Totem Pass into a Flame Tongue Totem, maybe a thing from below later on. This is the kind of thing that freezemage is very much equipped to deal with. But now ahqShaxy is starting to generate some tempo for himself on the board. Fire Elemental coming down, and this is the first time now on turn 6 that he's really asked a question to the freezemage, where he's really said, okay, now you have to have some answers. And that's just not good enough. You need to be asking those questions much, much earlier against this deck.
Very important question. How do you feel about 6/5s? And we'll figure out very shortly if Gogongsing respects them. Does he think they need to be dealt with immediately? Do you just very greedily play a Thaurissan? I mean, you don't really have a lot of stuff in your hand that I think the Thaurissan makes sense for here, but you would be getting at least some value out of immediately.
It's not a great Thaurissan hand for sure. I mean, Gogongsing is playing the evolved Kobold version of this deck, which means he has burn to spare. He has burn out the wazoo right now. So even spending an entire Fireball and an entire Frostbolt just to clear the board here, a lot of people don't appreciate how much spare damage you have in this deck and think that you won't be able to get there if you start firing spells at minions. So Gogongsing can definitely just go for the board clear here, recognize the fact that next turn there probably will not be this much power on the board. Like, it's not going to get bigger next turn if you clear the board this time, and then go for an Emperor turn later on. But he's going for the no fear play. Emperor comes down. As you said, not a great hand, but still addresses the board reasonably well, gives him some nice tempo moving forward.
Right, and now if you're the Shaman player, you just have to start figuring out, like, okay, you're going to get rid of the Thaurissan. You can't just leave that up. You're nowhere near winning the game right now.
Yep.
So you have to deal with it. But, how do you begin putting out the most power? Are you afraid of the AoEs coming out? What does the Thaurissan telegraph to you?
It's It's a hard thing to get a read on for sure, because it might be the sign of a bad hand. Sometimes an Emperor comes down on a hand that is full of some clunky stuff just to try and speed the hand up. As you can see, like Acolyte of Pain is a little bit slow to cycle with in Gogongsing's hand right now. So he might be just trying to speed that up, but this is for sure the play. Like, the way the 5 damage Lightning Bolt lined up on the Thoris arm was just beautiful, and the Trog draw gave him a lot of incentive to be able to overload that turn. But Frost Nova here going to stall for some damage. Shaxy will be happy to see it not paired with a Doomsayer, because he gave up his answer to that in the form of the Lightning Bolt, potentially. But now he's going to have to decide how much respect he wants to give to ongoing AoE now, because next turn a discounted Flame Strike could be paired with a ping to clear this board.
Yeah, and he's got so much power on the board already. You know, when he thinks about what is he expecting to see, Flame Strike has to be rolling around in his head there. He's like, if I play, you know, something like the Feral Spirits, you know, I'm basically asking for this board to get cleared. I've committed a lot of resources, so curious to see what he does. Goes ahead and just clears off the board completely, equips Spirit Claws because he has the spell power down. That is going to represent a fair chunk of damage, 9 damage over 3 turns respectively.
Yeah, and I like the decision to use Maelstrom Portal there to clear out the Acolyte of Pain. It's something that you do have to appreciate is specific to this matchup, where often in a lot of matchups you go, well, I don't really need to portal that. I can just hit it with my weapon. That saves me a card. Why would I waste an entire portal on using that? But Maelstrom Portal doesn't hit face, right? So you might as well use that to clear some minions and keep the card that does hit face, which is Spirit Claws doing 9 for 1 in this case, and just get in there, start trying to pop that block as soon as possible.
Yeah, and maybe at 28 health, you're not thinking like, oh, I don't want to take that 1 damage because it puts me to 27. I mean, Acolyte of Pain, not exactly a bruiser.
No.
You know, to quote Raven, he just kind of tickles you. But, you know, still something to be conscious of.
Now I'm just thinking about Raven tickling me, and it's sending me to my happy place, Rob.
Oh, your happy place,
yeah,
huh?
No.
This is not going well for our, what was it, Robble?
I forget.
What did TJ call us?
We'll have to check back in with TJ.
Well, we'll check back in on this game, and we see that, freezemage doing, I don't know. I don't know that I'd say this is okay. I don't know that this is like a good spot to be in.
As the freezemage player here?
I'm not feeling good about it.
I mean, you have a Evolved Kobold that you can pair with a Fireball, a Frostbolt, and an Ice Lance in your hand, plus a second Ice Block and another card drawer on the board. I'd say he's in a pretty good spot overall, Rob.
Well, when you put it like that, it's a lot harder to argue. You are the freezemage player. I was just staring down that damage, and yeah, the Kobold is, to your point earlier, just really opens up the window on what you can get away with in terms of doing damage.
Yeah, I mean, it really does change the equation. There was a bunch of numbers that were around, way back in the day. 21 was the max damage that you could do without any Emperor discounts, and then Emperor came out, and that changed the maths for a while, and then Forgotten Torch came out, and that changed the maths again. Now suddenly you're throwing Evolved Kobold into the deck, and this deck in total, if everything goes face, plays 70+ damage or something like that. So there's so many ways that you can combine these kind of cards to burn out your opponent. Ice Block comes down, and now with the extra guaranteed turn, this is just automatic lethal. Shaman, no heal in the deck, no way to deal with an Ice Block, not even any crazy way to summon a flare out of the ether to deal with this, so this is just going to be game no matter what Shaxy does here.
Right, you bring up the sheer amount of damage that can come out from this deck. Honestly, we saw both Warriors banned. Yeah. Do you think these days a Control Warrior actually needs to be banned as a freezemage player?
It doesn't need to be banned. It's still favorable for a tank up Control Warrior, but nowhere near as one-sided and unwinnable as it used to be. It's definitely a matchup you can navigate if you know what you're doing. I personally think the constantly banning Warrior as a freeze mage in your lineup is a little bit too linear in terms of looking at Conquest, but